Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 2 of WAM. Today we're going to be talking about the Apple TV exclusive Tetris that came out earlier this year. I'm Nick.
I am Nolan.
And just to start off, the start of the movie, how do you feel overall, you think?
Start of the movie, I think the biggest hurt during that was mostly just the idea of just like exposition. I'm always looking for exposition, I guess. I want things to naturally come to me information-wise. So when I see stuff like that, I'm always in the mindset of, okay, they're feeding me stuff. There were some graphics that felt like they were lasting a little bit too long, like the 2 years ago. That lasted like a good 10 seconds.
Yeah, that was the whole beginning thing where they were just introducing everybody and then giving you all the backstory for stuff. I understand why they needed it because of how, like, I guess complicated it was at the end with people just saying Stein, Maxwell, Stein. But it's not fun. It's not. It's just fun. You're sitting through it, and then it kind of gets to the movie.
I like the relationship we understand with the bank and our character Henk with an E. I mean, that I liked. And then obviously once you get into the main story and you see all these characters and you know who they are because of the exposition, it all flows smoothly because of that. So it's sort of just like an eating your vegetables kind of thing. But you know, it's whatever.
It's like a necessary evil kind of thing in this movie. If I really thought like how would we do it different, I can't think of a better way that you would introduce all those characters and all those relationships like that fast.
Yeah, you couldn't do it outside of his perspective, I don't think. You would have to start it off with showing the original thing, and then you have to wait a good, 15 minutes until you show your main character. And yeah, I think exactly. This was probably the best way to do it.
Out of the two, it was definitely the better move. But out of the way, I think the beginning, and overall, I think just not necessarily the pacing, but how quickly the tension rose or made itself known through a lot of the movie, because a lot of it was just the looming KGB. That was the threat.
I will say, yeah. So a big part of this movie is the idea of our main character, Henk, is trying to get the rights to Tetris. And going into that has a lot of issues because it was made in the Soviet Union, and getting the rights in a communist country is going to be a lot more difficult than anything that they've experienced. A lot of issues regarding who has the rights to it, what's been signed, and overall, hey, the KGB is looking into you because as a Japanese, Dutch American, we're not the fondest of you.
Japanese, Dutch American, grew up in New York and lives in Tokyo, who only speaks Japanese when it's like convenient for him.
Yeah. So most of it is just like there's a ton of problems coming in, but the biggest thing is, hey, the KGB is looking after you, and that's always a bad thing. But at first, it feels like it's always just like, you should leave now, and then Terrence's character Henk just goes, no, I don't think I will. So it's just, what power do they have? It feels like there's no tension to come here. And then you see a lot of cooler things that build up the tension, mostly with, what is his name? Alexia, the original inventor of Tetris?
Mr. Tetris? Yeah, that's
Alexia. That had a great way of showing tension through the scenes of them friending his family, showing what had happened to his father when he did something similar. And then I think the first thing that got me to feel like this has tension, and I remember I was complaining about it and you were like, Nolan, shut up. The first time I thought there was tension is when there was one official government agent who had finally done something good for Henk, and he got immediately just like beat up, and I thought, oh my gosh, look, they actually did a thing.
A lot of the movie, it feels like almost like they were pulling punches for what the KGB could have done. But also, since so much of the movie was based off a true story, the actual guy, whatever, Henk, I don't remember his last name, Henk, the real guy, he was the executive producer in the movie. And so because of how many real things they brought in, and with the whole negotiation thing, I think it's hard to stretch that any more than without it becoming ridiculous,
Yeah, I do think
because
so.
I think it's very easy to cross the line of silly Russian KGB.
Yeah.
But I think they did it well. And by the end of the movie, like the mad dash, I think was perfect with how they had the tensions build. And the main bad guy, the Russian guy, he was a perfect villain.
I do like him a lot.
I think he was great. Well, maybe not perfect, but he was the perfect like intimidator kind of. Where he just had an ominous feel to him every time he was in a scene or something like that. Or threatening his kids.
The perfect villain face. He's, oh my gosh. I'd hate to be his wife.
It's terrifying, really.
He looks so terrifying. Gosh, I think the tension really is like went from being what my opinion was the worst part of the movie to the best part. Just because I'm so glad they pulled punches and they let it be a slow burn of like, we're gonna not really let you know what it means to be what to do what they're doing, and then they immediately go into, hey, here's some guys who have lost their life doing this, not necessarily dead, but their livelihood. Yeah. Here are just all the corruption you see, and it's slowly like actually painting the USSR. And I thought that was really interesting.
I think one thing they did that I enjoyed that tied into the tension was like at the beginning, he threatens Alexei very lightly with his kids playing tennis, and he's like, oh, be ashamed if something happened to you that happened to your dad. And as the audience, we don't know what that is yet. And then they kind of reference it again later, but then finally, like towards the third act in the movie, then we figure out the whole story in the car from Alexei, and it kind of cements all what kind of emotion and what kind of stakes Alexei himself would be putting up to just get something as simple as a computer game out to other countries like that.
I think another thing that was trying to add into the tension was the imminent fall of the USSR. I think the only thing that sort of made it feel a little bit out of place is a lot of this has a ton of 80s iconography. And this is just stuck in my head because all I know about this is dates. But all I can think of is like, hey, didn't that fall in like the 1990s? So I'm always thinking, why is it always feeling like there's like a decade away? And that's like, this was what, 89 to 91 where it fell. So that's just me being stupid. 2 years ago, it would only be a 2-year difference between the time period it takes place into the actual fall.
I mean, to be fair, every single person in that movie that was Russian is like, Russia is crumbling.
Yes.
So that none of them liked living there at all. They were like, this is a dead country of thieves and crooks. They hated it.
That's the exact line. Yeah. Our country has become thieves. Oh, it's funny. And I think that's very well orchestrated in the one line where they're negotiating, and the guy that looks like John Goodman, Mr. Maxwell Senior,
big man.
He's going like, oh, don't you want what's best for the workers? And then some guy's just like, don't give me that Bolshevik crap. And it's like they're completely away from any ideal they had at the start, and they've become this corrupted thing. And I'm sure they said that at some point. They're like, communism doesn't take away freedom, and we become this thing.
Yeah, it was like the guy, the boss of Elorg, who was doing all the and he went back, and then he said that the one that the country's like liars and thieves, and then he wanted to do what was best for his country originally, but then no one else is helping the cause at this point, so he doesn't feel like he should help Russia at all, I guess.
Yeah.
And then what happened to him? Because didn't he say something that he was like, I'm going to sign the contract and then get fired immediately? But like, I don't remember.
He didn't necessarily have an ending outside of he alerted the authorities onto that guy's corruption. And since he was directing him, I would imagine he gets a better ending.
That's probably true.
He was working alongside the translator, who was a big part of the first half of the movie, and then come the second half, you realize that she's a KGB agent, but you also later find out that she has a soft spot for her country, so she doesn't like the corruption her boss is doing. This happens a lot, or not necessarily this happens a lot, but it does treat the USSR differently at a lot of points, because we go from them as this straight up evil entity, and then we find the first person that sort of is good, and then we find the second person that's a little good, and then at the end of it we're going, we all love this country and we're all good, we've just faltered. And that's okay. I like leaving it on a sort of note where it's like, oh yeah, the country's not that bad, but also it just tilts it.
I think it's good that they made it not Russia is bad, but like the culture, but just that the politicians in Russia at the time is bad, because they could have very easily just went Russia bad.
Yeah, I like that.
That would have worked for the movie. It still would have played the same way.
Yeah,
but true. And then what they did with how gray Russia was, all the apartments, the huge blocks of concrete. I think that was really, really good to show how bleak Russia felt in comparison to fucking everything.
I will say, it kind of sucks that this didn't get a theatrical release, because that means it's not eligible for Oscars. That means that it can't get anything for set design, costuming, or makeup.
They can if they're like digital only.
The rules, as I've been told and described to me, is you have to have some sort of theatrical release in order to be eligible for the Oscars. That's why The Irishman ended up having a small theatrical release just for the Oscars.
Yeah.
And obviously because Martin Scorsese wanted a deal to have his work in theaters.
Yeah. Damn.
I think that's why these
disappointing.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing. I hadn't even thought about it until then. I love the color. I remember there was one shot where I thought, man, they have a ton of communist flags during this parade, and you see all these tanks, and there's such a great variant of gray and red and green, and it always looks a little diluted, like non-saturated, but the colors still pop. And I don't know, it just looked really beautiful.
I think just the pure lack of color, and the only thing that you were seeing, like during that parade scene, the people had balloons. The only balloons they had were red and white.
You're right.
And even then, it was only like maybe 5 people even had any. So I think they were very particular in getting rid of color where they could, especially compared to the like retro and then like the straight up like Tetris shots, because Tetris is all rainbow colored and really colorful like that. And so to compare that, especially to like the 8-bit stuff in the beginning, that's really, really nice.
You're making me actually use my brain about contrast. I'm actually thinking about this as like a piece of art. Oh my God. I mean, wow, you're completely right. The Tetris graphics they showed for like transitions and colorful shots really contrast the bleak USSR. That's awesome. Wow.
And one thing that I didn't like about this movie, it was really the biggest thing is Hank's family.
Yeah.
I don't give a fuck about his family. They suck. I don't care if you missed that concert or whatever. She was bad anyway.
Oh my gosh, there's so many things to be thinking about. There's Alexia, there's obviously just the rights with Nintendo, there's all the different villains you have to think about, there's the house and everything. I don't think we needed to add the family into this to make us care, especially since we saw them so little. We didn't have really any chemistry between any of the actors, and I do think this is a big part on my part. While I don't think it worked, Taron spoke little to no Japanese when he lives in Japan with a family I assume he's been with for maybe 12 years.
I mean, the kid was 10, one of his kids. So he's at least 10 years minimum.
At least 10 years there.
And he only speaks it 3 times in the movie and forces his kids to learn English. He lives in Tokyo.
The kids never speak English. He rarely speaks Japanese, but you still have them talking to each other in that thing that happens all the time where it's I will speak in my native language and you'll speak in yours and we just completely understand each other.
Yes.
I just think that we have all these people speaking multiple languages in this movie. I think Egerton could have tried a little bit more.
I definitely for the Japanese bit, I didn't could have tried anything more. That because the only scenes we saw with his wife were the start where he's like, I gave our whole house up to the bank, and then
at the
our daughter's
office.
The office, and then you missed our daughter's concert, and oh my God, you're back for our daughter's concert.
That's basically it. We didn't need to see it.
I think at the only thing I think that was good about her is just when the Russians came to intimidate his family. And just, has your husband called yet? If he calls, you should tell him to come home. That was really cool. But it doesn't work as well when I don't care about this family. Yeah. But it was really well, I really liked how that scene was edited, because it was like the 2 KGB agents were walking up to the party that Hank and Alexei were at. I was pumped, because that was still the time where there wasn't a lot of stakes, and I Need a Hero not I Need a Hero, it was Final Countdown was playing, and it was so beautiful, and people are just rolling up in cars, and I feel like guns are about to get cocked, and I'm just thinking, are they about to shoot out this like party scene? And I was really excited for some tension, and then it comes to the house, and I'm like, this is so much lower but so much better at the same time. It's definitely cool because all your expectations of what you had are completely like, they're in a different country. You're like, whoa. But then also you're like, man, because like that would have been cool. But then also like Alexei and Hank probably would have like died.
Oh yeah, they definitely would, or
like,
it'd be like the coolest chase scene ever.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's obviously a huge amount of things that could have been done differently if this wasn't a true story, but we always have to deal with the fact that we are telling a story that's true or not. Why am I saying we? We directed this movie. By the way,
we actually made Tetris.
Gosh,
what'd you think about the Nintendo America guys?
Nintendo America guys were pretty harmless. I like the idea that they're there. I like the scene where they're all freaking out about the Game Boy, like they found the Ark of the Covenant, and it's just like, guys, do you know what this means? We're all gonna be billionaires.
He's like, can I touch it? He's like, go ahead. And then he like kind of smirks like he's gonna lose his shit. Like, and then he totally does. Edgar like stares at this Game Boy and creams himself for like 2 minutes just playing Tetris. Fun. And then he cranks out an entire version of Tetris on the Game Boy in 5 minutes for them.
I don't know anything about coding, but if you can make a version of Tetris from computer to Game Boy in 5 minutes, then I don't know, you might be God or something.
Hey guys, if we can make our own version of Tetris, why are we trying to license it? Let's just make our own version of Tetris. Fucking Eggert just made it in 2 minutes in the bathroom.
I was thinking, how would the USSR go about enforcing their copyright laws worldwide?
I'm not sure if copyright laws were as, I guess, prevalent as they were then than now.
Yeah.
Just because now, especially with like the internet, anyone can steal your stuff so easily.
Yeah.
But then I feel they were definitely there, but not as apparent. Mm-hmm. And the USSR was so much of, they didn't want exactly what they said in the movie. They didn't want to sell stuff to other countries. They didn't really want to buy stuff from other countries. They just wanted to be self-reliant, as much as it didn't really work.
I mean, I don't really know. I think it'd be interesting to look more into that. I don't know. This is probably the kind of movie that you have questions afterwards, and then your historian friend who knows way too much about World War II goes, well, you would like to know.
Well, actually, I think one thing I really like about the Russian bad guy did the gravity experiment with his 2 kids. That was my favorite.
That was really good. Yeah, obviously they sort of just took whatever language they could to insinuate a threat, and they tried to make it as threatening as possible. Mm-hmm. I think they were definitely like 5 other versions of what he'd said, and they just came down to gravity makes it all fall the same speed.
They probably had a few different cuts of that, but what the scene is, for those of you that haven't seen the movie, I don't know why you're listening to the podcast if you haven't, but
they're trying to get our approval rating, man.
I guess so. But our Russian bad guy, KGB, is threatening Mr. Tetris and his kids. And he's showing Mr. Tetris's kids, he's dropping coins over a balcony. And then he drops a chair and a coin, and they fall at the same speed. And he says, you fall at the same speed no matter how heavy you are, if you're a coin or a boy. And then he gets up, and Mr. Tetris tells his kids to run away.
And I like it. So I'm so glad the fall was like a good 5 seconds, too. It wasn't just like ding, bam. Yeah. It lasted so long.
And there was like some lady screaming at the bottom too when it landed. She was like, ah!
I don't like Taran's casting simply because he didn't resemble him when we saw it at the end, but I think he did a great job in enthusiasm and all that.
I think he totally carried the movie for a pretty big chunk of it.
Yeah.
That might also just be because all the Russian people were very pulled back, I guess, in terms of emotion. They were just pretty stonewall. And so compared to them, he was just a lot more energetic.
I think Alexia had a lot to do with it, but only in the last half. In the first half, he was really only there going, I'm not allowed to say anything, in a corner. Basically just the USSR having him there like, you're in trouble, mister. We're going to have a talk about this. I think the Americans, the Maxwells, were really fun. I really like their dynamic. They're the competing thing that originally had the rights to it, but then there was a mess up. And now, while Henk is trying to get the rights for himself to go to Nintendo, Maxwell Group is trying to do the same while basically working with a corrupt agent and paying them off to get the rights. And I love it because you see this interaction between the father, Maxwell, and then the son, Maxwell. The son owning the video game company, but his father having all the money. And it's just the idea if he wants to...
It was to take the lead.
Yeah. This kid wants to make something of himself outside his father, and his father's like, well, you're really bad at it, so I'll just do it for you.
I think the Maxwells, the whole thing about them, about him like laundering money and like stealing from the company was I think it was so well done through the movie.
Yeah.
Because it was just two passing remarks about it. It was just one, hey, Dad, do we have the money? No, of course we do. It's just tied up right now. Don't worry about it. And then the next thing, we just see him and like 4 other people just shredding papers. And as soon as his son walks in, he's like, oh, Kevin, get out. And then the other guys just run out.
And then by the end of it, we see them like, hey, you actually going to sign this deal that you gave us like an egregious amount of money for? And they're like, we have no money.
He just goes, well, I have money.
Just not now.
That's just so funny.
I legitimately, by the end, I think you might have heard me. I just go, oh, that's what that meant. And this does really set stuff up really well. Made it be just applying more and more pressure throughout. Might it be leaving little clues. And I think it does actually hit its peak at the ending chase scene.
The ending chase scene was really, really good. It's just it's so high energy compared to everything else and action packed, and it feels completely deserved because it's after the last hour and 45 minutes of trying to get the deals and just licensing. Then they finally get it, and they got to sprint out of Moscow. They're literally like, you're not safe until you leave Moscow. And so they got a mad dash out of there. But I think is really impressive about this movie is that they made bartering for video game licensing interesting, and as interesting as you can make it. Because I'm not gonna lie and say it was action packed. I was on the edge of my seat every minute trying to figure out who owned arcade rights for Tetris, but it was cool watching the story unfold and seeing all the twists and turns and all the confusion that happened just between all the characters. And I think they did really well making literally signing contracts and reading contracts into a movie.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always going to compare this to Air for whatever reason, just because I guess it became a niche, this kind of movie.
That's a fair comparison. I mean, isn't it a similar time period? Or isn't Air?
They're both 80s movies simply about who's going to get the rights to this specific thing that was fundamental to the 80s. This one obviously being Tetris, the other being Michael Jordan. One thing this movie does a lot better is it doesn't get boring. It really doesn't. And that has so much to do with how it's paced on keeping up tension. And I'm just going to keep talking about tension.
Because it was really, really good. Because they didn't give you too much so that you kind of felt... You had an idea where it was going, but you didn't know. But then they still had all that stuff that was setting up for the end. And it was just the perfect amount while not giving away too much to just ruin the experience.
Yeah. The tension in Air is Jason Bateman may or may not get Michael Jordan to sell the shoe he wants. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's fine. It's good mostly because I really like the actors' roles in it, but this actually does make it a good time at the theater, especially since the 80s stuff in this one isn't as camp as the ones they do in Air, because in Air you see how they do the 80s is we'll have a song on the radio in the background turned down, and we'll have a Rubik's Cube on the desk, and that's how you know it's the 80s, and they do that every single scene. In this one, they show the fun parts of the 80s, the parts I would like to remember if I were there.
If I were there. I do really like that, again, with the pacing. At the start of the movie, even though the start was introducing all those people and everything, I enjoyed the fact that we didn't like wake up with Hank or something. He was at a games convention, his game blew, and he saw Tetris, and that was it immediately. Then we were in the bank, and like the ball was rolling. And so I really enjoyed that it was straight into the idea.
I had asked you right after this ended, I was like, okay, so we have him as a game developer, but he finds Tetris, so he goes into sales, and he gets this big ending where he gets the rights to it. And then I asked you, do you think he ever produced another video game after that? Or do you think he maybe focused on sales? We did see the bit, which you told me is true because you looked it up, where he adds in the bit of, you can delete more than one line at a time if you line up like a 4-piece, which is now considered the Tetris move.
Him and while we were watching the movie, I read an article over to see how much of it was accurate because the actual guy was the executive producer. I was just curious. And it said on there that him and Alexi at Alexi's house talked for like 5 hours over the night. Not really in like as a salesperson, but just as a developer and as like just developer to developer wanting to improve the game. And they really did make improvements like the 4-line deletion where he just didn't think of that kind of stuff before. And it's not groundbreaking. It doesn't change the movie at all, but it's just cool. It's a really cool fact.
I think that was important to see, just so we understand in some capacity that Henk isn't just the guy who's just like serving Nintendo. This is a dude who has like some importance to him and like is overall, I guess, an important factor into the story of Tetris. Because imagine if like we find out, yeah, this guy's not really monumental. It just had to do with Tetris, which is why it's called Tetris.
I think that's fair because if it didn't have that scene, I guess Alexi really never would have had a point of like, oh, maybe this guy's like not too bad. Because after they started co-writing Tetris stuff, they were like buddies after that. And the guys like Mr. Tetris and Henk in real life are like still buddies now. They're still friends, which is really cool. But
I wonder if they let Alexia try to executively produce this movie. Probably not. They probably just wanted to keep Henk onto it, mostly because
it's his story, I guess.
Yeah, it's his story.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
What did you think about the music and all the remixes?
There was one that we didn't like where they turned it really scary. Which one was that? You remember what I mean? There was just one. Yeah. I think it was with. Was it with the family? Somebody was being threatened at the time, and there was just these.
Yeah, it was like.
It was some 80s song.
I don't even know. It was just like synth sounds that were like kind of slowed down with some other wah in the background.
Besides that, very, very good. They played a lot more into the Russian sounds of the Tetris theme. When they did play it, I went into it saying, Nick, if they play the Tetris theme more than 6 times, I'm walking out. They did it minimally, always at high points, and they always put in Russian lyrics to it, or they played more into the cultural aspects of it. That made it awesome. I really liked that bit. And then obviously they had either Russian dubbed or 8-bit remixes of famous 80s songs, and it was a lot of fun.
I think that them using the Tetris theme music and mixed in with the Russian stuff works so well because I can't at least I can't remember ever hearing the actual Tetris theme in the movie besides the very, very beginning like title card.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Like, I really can't remember just the bass-ass Tetris music.
Sometimes in the original score, they would do motifs to it, so they play like do 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 or something like that. And I always love when people do stuff like that where you can see little hints of the original.
Because even if that music wasn't Tetris, it still works for the scene and it works for the movie, especially. And I hate when people just like shoehorn stuff like that in because they're like, oh yeah, the Tetris music, let's use that. Oh yeah, Pac-Man. Oh, Adam Sandler's gonna love this. Pixels.
What is the? Oh yeah, is that? I don't even remember the Pac-Man theme.
There's no Pac-Man theme.
Oh
wait, no, it's the.
You're right. Yeah. They had that in a while. God, Pixels was bad. I forgot Pixels was bad.
Overall, I think I said it before when we started. I think this movie was just a sleeper. People totally missed on this, and I think obviously in terms of us being nerds and we like video games and like just shit like that, it also has a little bit more, not really meaning, but just like novelty to us than normal people. Probably. But even if I didn't care about like Nintendo stuff and video games like that, I still feel like this would be a really interesting movie. Yeah. Just because someone could be like, wow, all that stuff really went on for like the stupid 4-block game. Like, that's cool.
I'm gonna have this wrong opinion. I know it's wrong. I've been told it's wrong, but I think there was a lot of like cursing in this movie that made it rated R, And besides that, I don't think there was a single factor that made it rated R. Because overall, this is a pretty PG-13 movie. It just carries around fuck a lot.
Yeah, they didn't even say, even when Terrence is getting blackmailed by that blonde KGB lady. Did they even kiss?
Yeah, it's her kissing him, and then he immediately pushes
and then
her.
he's like, "Get out!" Yeah.
Yeah. It would have been PG-13 if it wasn't for that. I think that might have made some people not want to show their kids, but I obviously don't know if this was even a big market for kids. Seeing as it's the movie of Tetris.
Tetris, yeah. So. Them putting fuck in so many times, it never really seemed needed, besides for like the really high tension, like the people fighting each other over the rights at the very end.
Yeah,
like
right.
When the little guy that always plays an evil German scientist walks in and he just punches Maxwell immediately.
Oh, so good.
Oh, dude. Or what was the shot that we both died at where he turned around and he was like, oh. What was it?
There were a few like that.
There were a few really funny shots of this movie.
Oh my gosh. I mean, each time they recognize the people who were their original partners that they had turned against, it was great. My favorite part was when, what was it, Robert something and Hank are meeting. Robert was the original owner of the rights who gave it to the Maxwells, but then Hank was in there to give it to Nintendo. They were both in Russia trying to get the rights, and when they finally see each other just on the street, they just look at each other like, "You motherfucker."
Yeah, they both just look at each other and just say, "Son of a bitch," in sync, and they both try to call a cab.
Yeah.
And then Hank gets a cab with cigarettes because character development.
Yeah.
But overall, it's really up there with one of my, not an all-time favorite, but it's definitely a favorite movie of mine. I really enjoyed it.
This would probably be in my top 5 movies this year, I'd probably say.
That's fair, yeah.
I mean, really though, I think that is such a, I'm not going to say happy ending, but it filled me with a lot of excitement, especially since it kept it so low. I can't really think of a movie that changes like that. Maybe Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but it's not a growth. It's a spike. Yeah. It's an instant spike.
It's like a spiral. But in this, I agree with you completely. This movie, it comes out of nowhere and it feels completely deserved by the end of it.
It is, yeah. Okay. Anything else to say, or how would you rate it?
Overall, we're gonna out of 5.
Yeah, let's just do out of 5.
So out of 5, I'm gonna say it's probably a 4.5 for me. I really like this movie.
That's awesome. I'd probably do around the same, probably a 4, just because my thinking is I really like this movie. That's usually where I put movies that I know are great, but maybe I'm not gonna be like ADHD focusing on for the rest of my life.
A big reason I like the movie so is just because Tetris, but the pacing and stuff. It was just like a really I was pleasantly surprised when I watched the movie.
Man, what a fun time!
I know, really good movie, good podcast.
Good podcast. Hey guys, you're listening to WAM.
Hope you guys enjoyed.
Yeah.
The next episode, like we said last time, we don't really know when it's going to be coming out, but we're going to try to be as consistent as possible.
We got this one pretty similar to last time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was pretty similar, pretty soon. And if you guys have any sort of movie suggestions or anything like that,
keep them to yourself.
Yeah, we don't really want to know. But I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next time.
See ya.